for joining. This is so awesome. For those of you who don't know, my name is Megan Van Lowe, and I'm the education coordinator at Climate Generation. And I recognize a group of folks here from our last summer institute we had in DC. So welcome, thanks for joining. And some other folks who have joined our Teach Climate calls in the past as well from around the country. And I know that we'll kind of get to know each other and do some sharing of where we teach and where we are right now and those things. Oh, Betsy just sent something in the chat. Great. So if Zoom is working for you all, that's great. Let me know if you are having any issues hearing or seeing us, and I can help you through that, so don't be shy. I'm going to share my screen for a second here. There we go. So you all probably heard about this through Climate Generation, probably from an email from me or something like that, but welcome to the Teach Climate call. And if you don't know Climate Generation, we are a nonprofit. We're based in Minneapolis, but obviously have national reach for sure in our education program. We empower individuals and their communities to engage in solutions to climate change and work with different audiences in doing that: youth, educators, the public, and influentials. So tonight, just if this is your first time or maybe like your 15th time, I'm not sure how many we've had of this, but we meet once a month. This is totally informal time for educators like you to kind of connect on a specific theme or a book or an article or a movie. Tonight we're going to be talking about traditional ecological knowledge and how to do respectful teaching and science education with that, and then also talk about land acknowledgments. So I hope you guys brought some good ideas or thoughts for that. But in general, this network is for you, so please let us know of topics or themes or things that you would like to cover this year. We send out prior readings and resources, but obviously if you don't get to them, that's totally fine. Just show up and just be respectful of other people's opinions and ideas, and spread the word to colleagues that you might have. And every month we ask for a volunteer blogger. So if after this discussion you feel so moved, that would be awesome if you wanted to blog for us as you know, kind of around the theme that we're discussing. And well, actually, when was it? In December, Betsy, who was on the call, wrote the blog for the Hour of the Bees, and it's awesome. So you should all check that out, about her story of her family in the desert in Arizona. So thanks for doing that, Betsy. Let's just take this time now to get to know each other. Let's see who's on the call at the moment. If we could go around and say your name and your pronoun. So that would be what you prefer to be called, like she, her, or he, him, or they, them. Where you live, maybe you are where you are right now, and what you teach. And then if you had a chance to check out, or from your own research, the names of the native communities that live where you are currently now. So I'm going to stop the share so we can see the, basically up on the right-hand corner of Zoom, I really like the gallery view. Then you're able to see everyone at once. So it's this little box at the right-hand, up at the right-hand side. If you're interested in that, kind of fun. It's a Brady Bunch style. But I can start and then I'll pass it all along. So again, my name is Megan Van Lowe. I go by she, her. I am in Minneapolis and I work with all you teachers around the country on climate change education. And we are actually living in the lands of the Dakota people here in the Twin Cities. So I choose Nicole next. If you're ready.
Oh, you're muted.
Okay, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm Nicole Breedlove. I live in Maryland, just outside of DC, so very, very close to where we had the Summer Institute, Piscataway lands, and so we actually had a speaker, Piscataway tribal member, come and do the welcome at the Summer Institute for people who were there. Was that it? Did I cover everything? Oh, I'm a library assistant in an elementary school.
Great. Thank you. You want to throw the ball to someone else?
Betsy.
Betsy, I go by she, her, hers, and I work as basically outreach education, doing a lot of teacher professional development related to water and climate resiliency and underwater robots in Arizona, the University of Arizona. And we are in Tohono O'odham, Yaqui territory, and the Tohono O'odham are descendants of the Hohokam.
Great.
I'll go ahead and pass it to Lucy.
To Lucy? Me? Okay, so my name's Lucy Garcia, and I live in Tatavillam, Fernandeño territory, which is Los Angeles. Also, the Chumash also had people or time here. I'm not sure how all that works, and I'm pretty vague on all their history. And I taught biology in intercoordinated science for many years, and I retired about a year and a half ago, and now I'm going to go back like a week from now and teach 2 classes at a continuation school, because I have complete freedom to basically make the classes whatever I want them. So they're going to be climate change classes. And I was very interested. Also, I'm also trying to write a class for a salary advancement class for teachers here in Los Angeles in the LAUSD. And I have good connections. It can be done, but it's very hard because for reasons just like what this is going to be talking about, exactly how should science not become just, overbearing techie solution, we're the wizards. So that's why I'm here tonight. Oh, I'm she, her, hers. And I picked Graciano.
Hi, everyone. I'm Graciano Peterson. I'm in Washington, D.C. My pronouns are he, him. And I am a teacher at an adult public charter. I teach science and math, and I'm currently going through some climate change topics with my students. And Washington, D.C., of course, is the land, also as Nicole mentioned, of the Piscataway people. And I guess I will pass it on to Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Niemeyer. I hardly have a voice, so bear with me. I am a science teacher in Wabasha, Minnesota. I teach junior high and high school science, and I go by she, her. And Wabasha has a really unique history in Native American culture, which I am learning more and more about and wish I knew more about at the moment, but still learning because I'm new to the area as well. But definitely a lot of background in Dakota and Ojibwe relations within just the state of Minnesota in general. But so yeah, really excited to learn more about this topic, and really ready to learn tonight rather than help guide the discussion as I've done a couple times in the past. So let's see, I picked Lori, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Thanks. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my camera, so no camera tonight. My name is Lori Moberg, and I am based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work at the University of Minnesota, and I'm involved in two main projects there. I'm actually not an instructor, but I'm working on a project that is about humanities-led environmental stewardship curriculum with an emphasis on Indigenous work. So that's one part of my work, and the other part is that I edit a journal of public scholarship that is about water, place, and community, and we've had a lot of Indigenous collaborators for that work as well. So I am in Dakota homeland here in Minneapolis.
Awesome, thanks. And can you see the screen? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I can see everything. I just can't show you me.
Okay, sure. Great. Wasn't sure if you could pick the next person then.
Oh, right. So Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Love, and I live in Morganton, Georgia. It's Cherokee country, and right now I'm not currently teaching, but I run a website called Climate Change Education Exchange, which is a web portal to climate resources. And as I was going through my resources, I saw the opportunity for this webinar. And my son's joining me.
Hi.
Great, welcome. And then we have one more, Asha.
Yep. Hi, I'm here. My name's Asha. Coming from St. Paul, Minnesota, home of Ojibwe. I'm sorry, home of Dakota folks. I work for the city doing environmental and outdoor education for all ages of folks. Kind of specifically trying to reach people that are underrepresented in outdoor spaces. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And this is my first time joining this meeting. Yeah, I guess, I'm still learning a lot about kind of what all is happening as far as climate change crisis and how to be able to take that and kind of make it relatable and real and relevant to folks that it may affect in different ways.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for sharing and joining. This is really good to have a full house here. So I sent some readings prior to the meeting. I'm not sure if you all were able to get to those, but one of them by Robin Kimmerer, who also is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, has written this really great article here, weaving traditional ecological knowledge into biological education. So I'm going to kind of use this as a guide to our discussion tonight, as well as this was just kind of a worksheet, but I think has good guidelines for talking about how to weave traditional ecological knowledge into science education, similar to the article, and also talking about land acknowledgments, Indigenous people, how to respectfully teach about it, how to, partner with people, bringing that information, into the classroom, into wherever you might be teaching or working. Did anybody or has anyone read Braiding Sweetgrass? Lucy, I remember you recommending that book even.
I have.
You have? Okay.
I started reading it. I'm listening to it on audiobook, so it's really beautiful. And
Yeah.
I'm about 3 hours into
It's a very, it's
yeah.
It's a very long one, but I'm loving it so far.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good book to kind of read. You can read it in sections. You don't have to read it all the way through. I think you can also, pick it up and put it down. And we have a copy in our office, and we've kind of just been reading excerpts from it and things. But if you feel like you want to share about that tonight too, while we are having a discussion, that is great. So let's just start out with the idea and the practice of land acknowledgments. How many of you have done a land acknowledgement before in some capacity? A few? Yeah. Maybe if a few of you could share where you have done that. Maybe it was in your classroom or at a different type of event. And one thing that you think should be, that you shouldn't leave out of a land acknowledgement. Does anybody want to share?
I'm happy to share. The institute that I work for at the U, we developed a land acknowledgement in collaboration with the American Indian Studies Department on campus and a couple of other off-campus community partners. And a couple of the things that we thought were really important. So I've given this at any number of public events that we've had, so that it's we're sharing it with faculty, staff, and students, but also community partners or community people who are attending any of these mostly public and community engaged events. So it's with a pretty broad audience. And one of the things that we decided was important for us was to make sure that in that conversation or in that acknowledgement we're not just making a statement about this being Dakota land. So two things, it's not just traditional and ancestral land, it's also contemporary land of the Dakota. And then the second piece is that there's a sort of a motion toward thinking about how we make this more than just a statement. So what are we actually going to do about that? It's easy to say this is Dakota land. It's a lot harder to think about what that means and what our responsibilities are to Dakota people, because this is Dakota land. So part of that is educating the communities that we work with and at the public events, but we're also trying to sort through what other pieces we should be contributing.
Awesome. I would agree with that. That's something that we're working on with Climate Generation too, is that using the land acknowledgement as a way to raise awareness and to really name the specific group of people who we all agree are still alive and thriving in our communities today. And then also, not just leaving it at that, but like, what is the action step that we want to ask of people, and figuring out ways that we can engage or talk more about how, like, okay, we're acknowledging that this land is not ours, but how do we, with the intention of eventually like giving it back really in the end, and what that looks like and what that means. So yeah. Other thoughts from people, or what's the experience been like?
I can share that for me, it was more of from the race equity aspect of it. And when we did the land acknowledgement, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the fact that when we talk about race equity, we usually talk about the people who are directly affected, kind of who are like in the room. But what's important too is recognizing people who probably aren't in the room, or who are hidden by whether it be years of trauma or abuse or just like dispersal, that they can't be present. And so that was part of why we did the land acknowledgement as well when we were talking about race equity, to kind of bring those people back into their place and space.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, that's very important too. So we're acknowledging the Indigenous people, but also the people who have been historically misrepresented and underserved. And that is a huge part of it as well. And that's really bringing it into today too. So anyone else? If anybody is a teacher, have you, I know that there are like signs you can print out that says like what land you're on, you can hang in your classroom. Or have you touched on it at all in any of your classes, or maybe your school in general?
Tell you the truth, I've never actually brought to the kids' attention the land whose land we're on, but I did have the kids read, important passages from Braiding Sweetgrass, and we discussed the the honorable harvest.
Yeah, so other themes around it. I will just share my screen again with you all and show you the one that we are working on with Climate Generation to say at events, and also put on our website. Kind of talking about the aspects that were mentioned earlier, but we know what we have learned from our research and talking to Indigenous folks and people who live and work with us, around us, that it is important to acknowledge the specific group of Indigenous people, so naming them, so that maybe is doing your research of where you're having your event or where you're going to be, for sure. And like you're saying earlier, acknowledging that they are still here today and the land is legally theirs, according to international treaty law. So those are like the three big things there. And then kind of talking about the whole collective US too. We are jumping to that in the second part. And then really using explicit language. That's what we've also learned. You should use words like genocide. You should use words like ethnic cleansing and forced removal, because when you're general about it, it just kind of washes over. And so we need to really be uncomfortable and comfortable with saying these words, because that is what actually happened. And so trying to say, you know, the effects of genocide and colonization shape our everyday experiences, and it can easily be ignored that we're still occupying lands that don't belong to us, but people are still here. So that's kind of what we're working with. And then bringing into the equity piece as well. So not only is it Indigenous people, but like you're saying, people of color and Indigenous people, so BIPOC folks are currently and will continue to be disproportionately impacted by climate change and have historically been underserved. So really bring it into the, obviously us as climate change, or if you as educators in whatever subjects that you're in, using it as an educational tool or a piece to talk about how doing a land acknowledgement is really relevant to what you're trying to teach and understand, and just really bringing people along the way. So yeah, this could fit in a science classroom. This can, you know, be in a humanities. Could talk about really anywhere, and obviously using the right words and language for the age of the students is important too. But this is what we have created for adults, I guess I'll say. But yeah, thoughts on this, or stop share, there we go.
I think it looks great and it's important, and I'm glad that you guys are moving in that direction.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I think it looks really great too. One thing I wonder about though is you talk about how you acknowledge that you know, marginalized people will be disproportionately impacted by climate change. I wonder if you could add on just a little phrase, and should be centered in the solutions. You know? Otherwise, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, so saying that they're impacted, but solutions lie there as well.
Yeah, I like the idea that they are the source of solutions, and you know, resistance and solutions. I thought that was important, and you know, maybe to flesh it out with specifics from the area that you are in. You know, like for example, the Gabrieleños, Fenadeños are always, they're still looking for federal recognition. So that's a specific demand of theirs. And then of course we have a lot of climate injustice situations here. Not just climate, environmental injustice situations here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the thing we're trying to figure out too, is the action step that we would ask at specific events or in general, like if you're on our website or things like that. So yeah, I think the biggest thing that when we think of action steps is to start having people partner with Indigenous organizations and community members and listen and meet with each other and start forming those relationships. I think that is what the point that we're at as well, and have done in the past, and it's been really rewarding and helpful. And so continue to do and ask people to do that so we can learn even more. But yeah. I also just wanted to share this really beautiful map. It's made by a local artist. This is the Twin Cities, so Minneapolis, St. Paul here. You can kind of see it. But something like this, I think, would be really relevant and fun to have hanging in a classroom or something like that, where it's kind of just showing the native words for the places, so showing all of our lakes and rivers and what they actually are named. And if you look there, the Bedeh-Makaska is actually just got changed to be named that fully in Minneapolis. It was Lake Calhoun, and now they had this huge campaign to change it to Bedeh-Makaska, and now that is fully implemented. So that was major change by a woman who worked at the History Center to get that to happen. And so I think having them be able to reclaim these places that are either, historic or sacred sites, and especially just thinking about how they're all still here today, and that's what it was called, and we should return it to that name. So I think that's really important and good to see happen. But yeah, and just of knowing even of the places where you live, or where maybe your students live, and just seeing like, oh, where are these like historic and sacred sites, and how should we be respectful of those? So good to just keep doing our homework and research. So then thinking about, traditional ecological knowledge is really, starting with land acknowledgments is a big part of traditional ecological knowledge, because we're, acknowledging the culture and the people of the place. But if you all were able to read that article at all, or in just your own education and experience, does anybody want to take a stab at a definition of or describing what traditional ecological knowledge means? Or what are some words that come to mind when you think of traditional ecological knowledge?
One thing that comes to mind is just how much time was spent building it up. How many millennia were spent building it up, all the observations, the very keen observations, and that were held in not in an individual or in published papers or something like that, but in communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a huge part of it, is the time period, and like you say, millennia, so it's thousands of years that we have this knowledge from. Yeah. What else?
I would say that it's generational. So it's been passed down through generations and generations. And then there's a lot of indigenous communities that, are still surviving off of the land. And so that knowledge is very important for them, as the climate is changing more rapidly than it has in the past.
Right. definitely.
For me, when I think of that, it reminds me more of all of the connections, how everything is connected, and learning how they're connected and using your resources. You still keep those connections viable and not ruin or cut off part of the system overall. And then, like Betsy, you were saying, just something then passed down from one generation to another. And if it wasn't, it'd be starting over and learning and making those observations yourself. And so being that it's passed down, understanding that this is what you've noticed, therefore I can go and yes, I see that too, and I can confirm that these things happen to be true or whatnot, and that these connections are valuable.
And also I can add to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I like about traditional ecological knowledge is using the word being or beings, and knowing that we as humans are not above or apart from anything else. Like you're saying, that we're all beings intertwined with plants and animals and the water and insects, and just that if you have that perspective on the earth, like that is gonna, thinking that you're not better, that you're not using it as a resource, like you are part of it. I think that is why people were able to survive for thousands of years and not be, kind of where we are today with climate change, because we don't have that perspective in Western science of thinking that humans are, not better than the other things that we use and consume. So kind of like the reason that we're in the problem is because of today is because we haven't really been living with the values of traditional ecological knowledge. So.
And also, traditional science, Western science is slow in comparison. Like if you're depending on traditional ecological knowledge, you observe the changes that are happening more quickly and more deeply than having to wait for, a bunch of research to be done and then papers to be published for it to become part of mainstream scientific knowledge.
Right.
But what do people make of the difference, like what you were saying, Nicole, comes from the sort of the reductionist approach to science, which has been very successful, but now we're looking at systems thinking, and what are people thinking along those lines? How do we as teachers bring that aspect in?
I think with systems thinking, what we do is the stuff from the Cabreras out of Cornell with the DSRP, so distinction, systems, relationships, and perspectives. And so perspectives is a really good way to bring in just how different it could be different cultures view the systems, or we even do like from the perspective of the river, what is a watershed, things like that. So it doesn't have to be something that is living and breathing as we think of life, so I think perspectives is a really easy way to bring that in with systems thinking.
Could you post that up, a link or something, or just the name?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Well, and I also think of bringing it in as not, scientific ecological knowledge is here and traditional ecological knowledge is here. Like they complement each other, and it's almost like you can have one without the other. You can have, but like, I would say that scientific ecological knowledge is enhanced by traditional ecological knowledge because there's so much more that we haven't been able to learn because of the time constraints of that, and as well as just this different perspective of only looking at the biological system itself versus integrating the spiritual and the emotional and the cultural of it all too. So not saying that, I think that they can complement each other. They're not just standing alone. And traditional ecological knowledge is, you know, just as vetted and, you know, that you can rely on it too. I think some people think that, oh, because it's not scientific, that like they don't trust it or something.
Tribal knowledge.
Right. Yeah. So just letting students
Superstition.
know that it is valid and very well documented. Well, we were fortunate to have this woman named Melanie Montano, who works for the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. It's an organization up on Lake Superior in Wisconsin. She was a speaker at one of our public institutes that we had, and she shared what traditional ecological knowledge means to folks who work and live around Glyphwick. And here are just a few highlights that I wanted to share from her. Lots of things that we have been saying, but basically traditional ecological knowledge is all of these things. So it is culture. You know, the knowledge is obtained from their cultural practices. It is truth, and a lot of the truth comes from the stories that have been told through generations of the way that they know the world works around us. It is stories, so that's how you can communicate the knowledge. An example she gave was a story of why the oak tree keeps its leaves through the winter. They have a specific story about that, and we know that that is scientifically true, and we can observe it and all those things, but just sharing that story. It is the environment, so obviously describing what's all around us and why things change. It is a life way, so that kind of goes on to, I think, what someone had mentioned earlier, is that, you know, when folks are really fully dependent on the land, that if something changes, they have to adapt to it. And she has said that, you know, obviously people have been adapting and moving and traveling for those thousands of years. They didn't always stay in one place. But when something does change, their way of life is obviously heavily impacted because they're so connected to the land. And that's what's changing now with climate change, is that it's happening way too quickly for any of us to be able to adapt and react in that way. A couple more. Kind of what I was saying. So change with climate change is happening too quickly now. Traditional ecological knowledge is also observations. It's what you see and notice. And we know that we just have the longest record over thousands of years. Knowledge is also the language. So thinking about the words that you use, like manumin is wild rice, and wild rice is a huge plant species that really kind of contributes to the culture and livelihood of people living on the Great Lakes. And so if wild rice, you know, leaves that area, where does that word go? Thinking about the loss of language. Traditional ecological knowledge is also about survival. So the stories of what people had to go through with the changes. Manadugs is the spirits that are tied to everything that they do. So the TEK has a spiritual aspect to it. And then the beings. So all the species, humans, plants, insects, and animals are all equal and a part of TEK. So I think those all, I mean, it's such a, you can try to say what it is in one sentence or two, but I think when you see all of this, you're like, oh yeah, it is just kind of like the way we live and the way of life, and how we understand the world and how we interact, which just really makes me so excited for like how, if we could teach science this way, I'm like, this is how we can solve climate change, because just understanding the connections and everything to each other and to the land just makes so much sense. Any thoughts on these highlights here?
I just want to say about the, can we go back one?
Yeah.
Can you go back one? Okay, so this idea that that we are a part of nature, and that is, we can talk about food chains all you want, but it's so much more than that. There's so many more connections than that, and it really is a life way. And that, we're so lucky here on Turtle Island, or North America, what do you want to call it, is in that we have peoples who have relatively recently, given history, been the people on the land and know how to care for it. And we can learn. Because one thing in Braiding Sweetgrass is that she explains that places that are under, it's been studied, places that are under tribal control are actually better cared for, are actually healthier than places where they're excluded from it and that are just left alone. And so the idea that we could learn a way to actually give back to the land instead of just taking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I have two further questions here, more from the article, if folks were able to read it, or just your own ideas. But one of them is, so thinking about all this stuff with TEK, and I think this is the right crowd for this question, but why should we include TEK in science education? We talked about the perspectives, bringing that in, but other ideas of why? Or why would you want to bring it in to what you do?
Because it's true.
Yeah.
I think it brings in, like, it helps people place themselves in the environment, because there's a lot of the stories, the living off the land, the understanding the land, it relates it to everyday life. And I think that would help some other students relate to it better than just learning about, this population survives on this population, or they eat this, all the scientific facts. But if they can relate to it, I think they can learn better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What else? What other reasons why?
I think local perspectives are important. So I think when you talk about traditional ecological knowledge, you're usually talking from a more local perspective, and that's really helpful for students. So I think that in general, doing that is going to allow students to just connect with the material much easier if they're talking about something that happened, is happening or happened in their local area.
Yeah, definitely.
I've used in the past with my high school climate kids, where they would sketch an image of just their surroundings. Like, it could be sitting from their front porch, what they can see around them, or just how land is used around them. And we kind of share some of the things that they see, and then we take it from a climate point of view and go, okay, if climates continue to change the way they do, temperatures the way they are, precipitation changes the way they've been happening in our area, how would that affect, you know, the things you see on a daily basis and the things that you might take for granted or whatnot that you just assume will always be there. And I think that was really eye-opening for a few of my students to see that, you know, they've always had this cornfield out there, and now this year it wasn't there because we had flooding all through summer with all of the snow melt and then all of the precipitation we got here in Minnesota. So it just kind of brings to light that things are changing, and if you take a moment to really think about it and start making observations, they're changing faster than you think. Where they might not have noticed that anything changes at all, that it's been normal, but just bringing light to these little things that are different every year and adding that up over even 10, 5 to 10 years, that it's made a big impact on our environment.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I just also like the idea that we don't have to kind of be stuck in one way of approaching science or understanding the world, that you might get like, if you were only in your head doing a project and then you're like, oh, then I feel like if I go and talk with other people and brainstorm, I'm like, whoa, like I'm thinking of ideas that I didn't even know were there because I'm hearing new insights and perspectives. I feel like that's the same. If we, keep down one path, we're only going to be able to see one way out. So I think that TEK really brings that holistic approach to think like, oh, have you thought about it this way, for problems, especially with climate change, because we know everything is connected. So I think that's really important.
I think it also helps to kind of put a perspective on it as there's no lands that should just be like given up on, like as an example, I saw a video a couple of years back. I think it was called Tar Creek, maybe. It was about a Superfund site in northeast Oklahoma. And just hearing people talk about, this small area that is their land, and even though it's a Superfund site, they are dedicated to cleaning it up. It's like a different perspective than what a lot of Americans would have of just, okay, we're going to get up and move somewhere else. It's, having that deep connection to the land can give hope to people that there's people dedicated to, doing whatever we need to do to restore and regenerate our ecosystems.
Yeah, that's definitely a good feeling. Yeah, so then talking about the why, then going to the how. So with all those reasons, how or what are ways maybe you have done or would like to try incorporating TEK into science education or whatever you teach? I don't know if you guys saw this flyer as one of them linked, but it has some tips for how to do it if you're interested. But basically, during your research and homework and understanding who lives in your area, and I think even just like trying to figure out how to contact folks and set up a meeting to get to know them and hear their perspectives, to be able to do it respectfully. I also feel like there are a lot of resources out there that can help you like facilitate activities or do lessons and still teach to the standards, but just use more like TEK type of things like we have done before. If you wanted, well, we did like an evaluation in one of our workshops, and instead of just having like a worksheet or something, we used a medicine wheel, and talked about how like it's our mind, our soul, our hands, our heart, and our spirit, and how all of those, like we evaluated how we had learned through those and asked questions. So just even little things like that, I feel like inserting is a good place to start.
I think,
Mhm.
oh, sorry, did I interrupt someone?
No, go ahead.
There are a lot of good videos too, because even if, like, first choice, of course, is to be able to connect in person with people, but there are also videos where Indigenous people are, speaking for themselves directly to you, and there's quite a few good resources like that. NASA had a series that was on PBS, and then I included one in the chat that is one of my favorites. That's not part of the NASA series, a different one.
Cool.
So one of the things that I think is talked about is just the hands-on learning about something that's, like an important, an actual plant that's important for that area, according to what the native people have to say about it, and just using those plants or animals as in some kind of project. Might be a restoration project, or maybe just observation or whatever, but you begin to orient the kids to that. And then that brings in also it has a communitarian part to it too, if you can bring in parents to hear some part of the project.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely hands-on learning is going to bring in the students who historically have not been most successful in science. I think that's also what TEK can do too, is that if you think you're not good at science or you're not good at STEM subject areas, that TEK can really bring those students along who thrive better in more of a creative setting or hands-on or things like that. And I think that it's still science. And so that's just another great way to have them learn. Other thoughts on how, or anything else in general from what we've touched on tonight? Anybody feel a blog coming out of this, or? Is this something that you would want to bring, like a land acknowledgement up to maybe people who are in your organization or your school to be like, hey, could this be something that we institute? Do you think that could be something that would happen? When I've gone to events more recently, it's becoming more and more common, I think, in the Twin Cities to hear land acknowledgments. And so when I hear them, I'm like, yay. And then it's also like, okay, what's the next step? So I think also that's going to become more commonplace. And then it's like, well, then what do we do? So
it brings up the whole problem of reparations, which is really repair of the land. I mean, it's repair of the land too.
Mm-hmm.
Reparations to the people and to the land.
Yep.
There's another terrific book, which I'll put in the chat. Never mind.
Yeah, you guys check out this chat. There's a lot of good links. I just copied and pasted it so I didn't lose it. And I can send it in the follow-up email too, so you guys all have it. Well, I know this is an ongoing topic and way to keep integrating it, keep teaching about it, talking about it, learning from people. I know that we're all on different parts of the journey, maybe personally and professionally, but I think it's just really important to keep working on it and figuring out how we can best do it respectfully, and especially just for the people that you teach, so that they can learn about it and know it as well. And I just think it'll have such a huge effect on how we can work on climate change and all the social justice and climate and environmental justice issues that go along with it. So yeah, any other thoughts before we all sign off here? It's about 8 p.m. Central Time. Well, our next Teach Climate Network meeting is, let me just pull it up here, is going to be Monday, February 24th. And we're going to try for 7 Central Time again. We are going to read the book Shipbreaker. I don't know if you have all heard of it, but it's a young adult novel. And it is a post-apocalyptic novel, but has obviously, the way that they do, real world contexts and implications, talking about how people have been breaking down ships that are along the coast, and it's a really dangerous work, and how that impacts environmentally and social justice and all that kind of stuff. So check that out. We'll talk about it on Monday, February 24th, and if we can't get to it, you can still join us. And yeah, again, if anybody feels inclined to write a little something up, why don't you just shoot me an email and we can work on that. And I'll send a link to the email, or in the email, of Betsy's last one, if you can see what it's like, because she wrote a really beautiful piece. So great. Well, thank you all so much for joining. This might be a record, 9 people. Nice work, folks. It's great to see you all and joining from across the country. So have a good evening. We'll see you next month.
Thank you very much for this topic.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thanks for the topic. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.